So Tribune has the pleasure to welcome you to the first edition of the European Week. So this event co-conceived by Tribune and the think tank Europa Nova, whose founder does us the honor of being here tonight. He is also a writer, a former special advisor to the Vice President of European Commission in charge of digital. His last book, European Pride, was finalist of the last European Book Prize, and it praised by Slavoj Zizek, the most commented philosopher of all time. So please welcome on stage Sir Guillaume Clossat.
Our second guest this evening is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation of Spain. She is now Dean of International Affairs at Sciences Po in Paris. Please welcome on stage Mrs. Arantxa González.
Our next guest is a Minister of Culture in Slovenia and is now Director of the Program of the Future Capital of European Culture in Slovenia. Please welcome Sir Zoran Pelko.
And our last guest is the former CEO of Women's Forum for the Economy and Society. She is now working at the G7 and G20 for gender equality and is part of the Advisor Bureau International of the USCP. Please welcome on stage Mrs. Chiara Corazza.
Dear public, dear friends, thank you again for being here tonight. It's a pleasure for Tribune to organize this third edition of European Week. Thank you, Monsieur Loulouza, and all the SCP community, which was very helpful for organizing this event. Thank you also to our partners, Indefi, Les Écolos Parisiens, SCP alumni as well. And I wish you a very good conference. Please welcome also Monsieur Loulouza, our Dean, for a moment.
Dear former ministers, dear Chiara, dear Guillaume, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear students, dear all, very well welcome to ESCP, you know, a young school of 204 years old. Actually, we were founded in 1819, so we crossed a lot of crises, you know, economies and so on. So this is important. And also, this year is very particular because we'll celebrate our 50 years of anniversary of our European model of multi-campus. So this is very important. That's why I would like to start to thank for this great initiative of the Week of Europe. Of course, especially Tribunes, of course, Margot, Chesson, Armand, all the teams, of course, Flore, full today's. And of course, I would like to thank our great partners, you know, Europa Nova, this think tank, also Act Tank, very specialized in Europe, and also because we have a long-standing collaborations together with ESCP, and also this is great opportunity for our students to do that, and this is great initiative that's coming from our students. And you know that the Europe Week, it's perfectly in line with ESCP. Why? First, Europe is consistential to ESCP. That's why we don't call ESCP Europe. Why for? Because ESCP is part of also Europe. So that's why it's an obvious choice to organize such a days, especially after being hosted at the European Parliament. I know that Guillaume, you were there as coach for our Designing Europe seminars 2 weeks ago. Second, the topics to be discussed during this Europe Week fit our ESCP 5 mindset that students must acquire. They are ESG, environmental, social governance. Second mindset is tech. I coined the term ABCD, AI, big data, blockchain, cybersecurity, coding, and digital transformations. Also, entrepreneurial mindsets. Fourth, multicultural mindsets, how to move between cultures, how to collaborate with other cultures. So this is the perfect fit for today's roundtables. And the last one is hybridizations of competencies, which mean the cross competencies, how we can collaborate with other disciplines. And this year's, for these editions, is the European Pride through 5 pillars, because the European Pride is coming from the books of Guillaume. This is excellent books that I think that some of you have already read. If not, I recommend you to read. And so these 5 pillars are, of course, the first is civilizations, second is democracy, third is about ecology, which is very important, third it's about numerics, tech, digital, and the last one is what will the future, which means perspective 2050 of Europe. So for this evening roundtable, it's faces with war, what European civilizations? With the MIM students, we were at the core of the subject when they had the seminars, as I mentioned, Designing Europe, to draft European economic and social laws taking into account the impact of the war in Ukraine. After the year of conflict on the European continent, it is, of course, a question of becoming aware of the links that unite us. As our motto said, united in diversity. Thanks to this, our multi-campus model, Berlin, London, Paris, Madrid, Turin, and Warsaw, ESCP promotes and also spread its cultural acronym, which means European Solidarity, Community, and Plurality. So this diversity is an asset for ESCP and Europe. There are, of course, challenges that probably tonight our great distinguished speakers will address. But we think that this is also an opportunity for this roundtable to discuss about our civilizations. So thank you all for being here to this evening, and especially our distinguished guests, as Flor and Fulf mentioned, Soren Pelko, Chiara Corazza, Aranza Gonzalez, Céline Specker, and unfortunately she could not be with us because she's on sick leave, so we have a special thank to her for this evening. And of course, Guillaume Clossard, our partners, great from Europa Nova. And also I would like to thank Isabelle Négrier, the General Directors of Europa Nova, for this great organization as well. So we hope and we are sure that this evening debate will be ESCP exceptionals and also ESCP cultural. So it's my pleasure to declare opening this Europe Week 2023. Now I leave the floor to Flor and Fulkes. Thank you very much.
So thank you for being here tonight. Our very first question to begin our roundtable, are you proud to be European? And we can, for example, begin with Mrs. Corazza.
Good evening. Good evening, all of you. Good evening, dear young future European and actual European. A big thank you to the Professor Leon for inviting me and to Europa Nova, and especially to the team of the young people who prepared this event. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm really delighted because I think that it's the right moment to remember what Europe is and what we can do in Europe. And I think that the best place is ECP the true European School of Commerce, where my daughter and my son studied, and now my nephew. Then you can imagine how this school is dear to my heart. 2 days ago, we celebrated the creation of the European Economic Community. We celebrated a great story of freedom, of peace. And aspiration for freedom gave the European people this strength, the courage, to rise again from the ashes of war. You were not there, but I can tell you, it was not the Europe that you know now. We had to pay a high price for this freedom, thanks also to those who sacrificed their lives from the other side of the ocean, from our freedom. The European civilization was in danger, challenged by enemies everywhere. We experimented what happens when Europe does not stand up to fight for freedom. We know it's not for granted. This freedom, this vocation for an openness, exchange, this liberty to travel, to study, to create, to innovate, has a very, very deep roots that I would like to share with you. Our European story started at least 5,000 years ago, on the island, on the seashores, along the rivers. Centuries and centuries of exchange, of a mixture of different people, different religions, different traditions, a mixture of a way of thinking, a mixture of entrepreneurship, and dialectical ideas. Merchants started in Crete, then Pisa, Venice, Hamburg, Ghent. Discoverers and explorers in Lisbon, Genoa. Artisans in Etruria, Flanders. Philosophers, physicians in Athens, Palermo, engineers in Rome. And then monasteries, abbeys, have preserved and transmitted those precious heritage, this unique knowledge all around Europe. The troubadours spread poems and songs through Europe, and the prestigious universities in Europe have nurtured a new humanism. Not a surprise that the oldest worldwide still existing university is Bologna, followed by Montpellier and Padova, where you are free to teach and free to learn. The Renaissance has then opened a new trades, new discoveries, finance within free cities in free countries. Therefore, manufacture, art, culture could flourish all around Europe. The best talents, artists, scientists, found inspiration by each other in each country. No frontiers, no language barriers. We were in Renaissance time. Caravaggio and Rembrandt, Vivaldi and Bach, Copernicus and Galileo, Shakespeare and Molière have something unique in common. They are European, completely European. And lately, Zola and Verga, maybe you don't know Verga, but it's a very great Italian writer, had the same European approach for the human condition. I could continue for hours, but I would like to take this opportunity to also to pay a tribute to outstanding women. Some have existed, some other not, but those outstanding women certainly brought a contribution to shape our Europe of today. Starting from Europa, you all know, the Greek goddess, so beautiful that Zeus fell in love with her and kidnapped her. That's why we call her Europa. And then, as soon as I arrived at the Women's Forum, you remember that I've been the CEO of the Women's Forum for many years. The first thing I wanted to do was to celebrate the 16th anniversary of Europe. And my first Women's Forum was in Rome to celebrate the Treaty of Rome. And of course, it was my way also in Villa Medici to remind to the world the contribution of European women. It's a pity, Arancha, at the time I didn't know you, otherwise you had been there. That the cradle of the European civilization, it's also a matter of women. And by the way, at the time, we produced a very beautiful film with the European Parliament, and I invite you to see it. It's in the last 60 years, the woman who contributed to do Europe. But even before this last 60 years, I would come back at our origin. Already in Olympe, you know, the headquarters of gods. You know who made the law? Women. Hera, Venus, or Aphrodite, as you like to call her. Athena, the protector of Athens, who guided so wisely Ulysses around from shore to shore. She was a woman. Otherwise, he would be at lost. Of course, Proserpina, Artemis, and so other many. They were so powerful as the male counterparts. They were influencing, give advice, and acted. Do you agree? Good. Then we have great, how can I say, great women. Idido, Antigone, they forced our admiration and inspired poets for centuries for their courage and determination. And to know our future, you know, will you guess what? We consulted women, the Thetis and the Sibyls, and we had to listen to them. And then some heroes, very dear to me. I don't know if you know Edna de Scione. She was the first diving woman, and during the war, Greeks against Perse, she was the one who went and brought the victory to Greece in the Salamina battle, because with courage and still determination, she cut the mooring and dragged away the anchors. That's story, it's not legend. She was a woman. She swam and swam and swam to bring the victory to our country. And then maybe you know Hortense. Hortense was a noble Roman woman who fought against unjust taxes that they were dedicated only to women. She said, why we women have to pay taxes that men don't pay? And she won. And then Hypatia, you know her. She was the first biggest mathematician and astronomer of her times. And she invented, by the way, astrolabe for the ship navigation and the devices measuring the density of fluids. I could say so many else. You maybe better know the European queens, starting from Hippolyta, the queen of Amazon, or my favorite. My favorite, Galla Placida. Do you know her? Who knows Galla Placida? Galla Placida, it's a myth. She exists. She was the last daughter, the only daughter, of the last emperor of Italy, Theodosio. And when he died, it was the jewel, the most renewed things, the most precious thing that the emperor had. She could marry whenever she wanted. She was refined, speaks 6 or 7 languages. She was, of course, very beautiful. She could do everything. You know what she did? She fell in love with a barbarian, a Visigoth, and she married him, Atauf. You imagine how daring she was? And this one that she married was the brother of the king of the Visigoths who had destroyed Rome, the famous Alaric. That was a woman that had courage. And by the way, I invite you to visit a mausoleum in Ravenna who told the story of his impact and what she did. And she had a lot of impact in education and many things that she did. She was a great empress. Other women have been really very important in social and economic and religious issues. I think about some of, again, my favorite one. Santa Barbara, you know her? Santa Caterina di Siena. Santa Chiara, of course, sorry, my name is Chiara. Along with St. Francis, she left everything to bring back the Roman Church to Christian fundamentals. Love each other in a spirit of poverty. And you know all the role that queens have done since Matilde di Canossa, Eleonora of Aquitania, Queen of Three Kingdoms, Anne de Bretagne, Catherine and Marie de Medicis, the English Queen, Elizabeth, Mary Stuart, Victoria. And of course, women were the key stakeholders, when I say of course, were the key stakeholders at the Age of Enlightenment, where Voltaire and others went to explain how you can be an empress or a czarine and be enlightened. It was Catherine the Great of Russia and Marie Therese of Habsburg. It's not so well known, but it's the truth. And one other less not well known, it's Maria Luisa, the Duchess of Parma e Piacenza, my birthplace, the former wife of Napoleon. She left a very good souvenir in our country, near to Parma. In those challenging times, I would just add 2 other women. The role of women as peacemakers. 500 years ago, 2 boys were starving in the prisons in Spain. They were the son of Francis I of France. Francis I and Charles V were too proud and too attached to their power. None of them would give up Italy. The war was endless. Two great ladies, Louise de Savoie, Francis' mother, and Marguerite of Austria, Charles V's aunt, decided that enough was enough. They negotiated together in Cambrai, and they signed what we call the Ladies' Peace, La Paix des Dames, that ended the war in Italy. So many examples. Can I follow? It's too long. Can I just follow 2 minutes? Yeah, sure. Because this is Europe. Yeah, sure. So many examples too. I will try to be more rapid. In arts, science. I have a preference for some painters. Do you know Artemisia Gentileschi? Do you know Chiara Guistola? Do you know Elisabeth Vigée-Lebrun? They have been great painters as men, but are not so well known. And as a scientist, of course, Marie Curie. But I am especially grateful and admire women who fighted for their ideas, for justice in Europe, and they opened doors in a universal rights, human rights. Look at Olympe de Gouges, executed by guillotine during the French Revolution for publishing what? The Declaration of Human Rights. She said, I want to die as a man on guillotine. It's not because I'm a woman. She died. So many other to mention. And I would like just to finish with some that's very dear to my heart, which I had the privilege to work a lot with. Simone Weil. I knew her since her election in 2079. None of you was born. But you cannot imagine what it was, the election of the President of European Parliament. You cannot imagine how amazing it was for us at your age, saying we can vote, and we can vote for our parliament, and for a great lady who really represents Europe. It was a dream, and a dream came to reality. You cannot imagine how we were mobilized all around Europe, how we went there to vote. It was my first vote. It was the first time I had the right to vote. But all of us, not only me, in Italy, in France, in Spain, I mean, it was an excitement because it meant freedom, really incorporated by men and women who wanted to fight for this Europe. And if I wanted to make the justice frame, it just explained that we are living in a very challenging moment, and we don't have to forget that this freedom, it's not coming like that. It has been very, very it was a fight for many, many centuries and years. And again, it's not for granted. We have to stand up and continue to fight for this freedom, because Europe, it's our roots, it's our ADN, and that gives us the possibility to bring all together. We are all different, but we have a common past and a common future. And this is something that I wanted to share with you, because I'm really convinced that this Europe is precious not only for us living here, but for the whole world.
Thanks a lot for this introduction. And so now we go on the first question. So Europe is one of the continents with the most significant history. Every country has its own origins, and for a large part of them, the entrance into the European Union has been an important step in it. And so the question is, in the context of a European Union with 27 members, is it likely to conceive the existence of a European civilization? And is it a good thing to do so? If you would like to start, Mrs. Gonzalez.
Well, let me first thank you for putting together this event, and also for connecting us with lots of other Europeans that are not here in Paris, but feel very strongly that this is a conversation that they want to chip into. I mean, civilization is a concept that has a lot to do with history. And we've heard a lot of history from Chiara a minute ago. Although there are other parts of Europe that should also be in those long list of history names, more to the east, more to the north, north of the north, east of the east. But I don't want to talk about history. History is an interesting concept, and history is something that historians, and I'm sure there are many in this room, do much better than I can do. I want to talk about the people of Europe, because at the end of the day, the sedimentation that history is, the civilization that is the sediments that Europe has constructed along centuries, today is a political reality called Europe, or rather European Union. And it is a political reality not because of the history, but because of the willingness of citizens to construct something together. And what is this something together that Europeans want to construct and want to keep nurturing is, in my view, the question that we need to look at. History tells us how we got here. History is helpful in understanding and throwing light, but what matters is what Europeans want to do moving forward. And what I think Europeans want to do moving forward is have Europe as this very specific space that combines three things much better than anybody else in this world. This is why Europeans want to do it together. Economic competitiveness, because that's the guarantee of progress. Democracy, because we have learned the long, very tortuous lesson that we want to live in a space that is and lives as a democracy, but also because we care about solidarity. This is today's European civilization. It's been built along the centuries, but what matters today is the willingness of people to make of Europe this a specific place with these three characteristics. Now, if Europeans look at the US, they see a lot of economic competitiveness, we see a lot of democracy, but we don't see that much solidarity. When we look to the east and we look at China, we see a lot of solidarity, we see a lot of economic progress, but we don't see that much democracy. It's Europe, and this is what we as Europeans want to do in Europe, is combine these three things and combine them because history has told us that it's these three things that we want to progress together. So I don't know if this is something we can call civilization. I prefer to call it the peoples of Europe in plural, because Europe is very plural. It's plural from the languages, it's plural in religion or no religion, it's plural in political affiliations and in sentiments, but it's Europe.
Thank you very much. So, Mrs. Gonzalez, you just talked about this pluralism that Europe represents. So I would like to ask a question to Guillaume Clossat. Can we really talk about a European federation?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer directly your question, but I just want to come back on the word civilization. I think it's a living word. It's not something which is in the marble. And what Europeans wanted to do post-war was to break with a certain vision of civilization, because we were the spokesman, the hero of what we call the most advanced civilization, with a mission to promote this civilization worldwide. And post-war, we felt guiltiness, and we decided to invent something, a new system, putting dignity at the center of the game. And this is really the differentiation of Europe. We put the human being at the center of the game. And for me, beyond the state, beyond the law, we put the dignity of human being as the thing we need to care. And it explains everything what we want with regard to competitiveness. We want a social, a market social economy which share the wealth. We want a democracy which protects minority and people. We want solidarity. This is really the core of the European project, and this is really what I would call the beginning of a new civilization in disruption with the past. And we were very inventive. We had a problem with the word civilization because it became a taboo for decades and decades, and we have some difficulty to speak about it. So we left it to nationalistic, to autocrat, but also to the US, which considered post-war that there was not any more European civilization. There was big debate on that. There was an American civilization, of which Europe was a kind of branch. And to China, because they legitimate their supremacy about the long story of the Chinese civilization. So we are presently in a war of civilizational narratives. And we can't avoid that. It's a reality. So we need to have our own narrative. This is very important in the international fight in which we have, in order to promote our model and our DNA. If we don't have it, we are going to lose this war, and for me, Europe will be marginalized. Which is the first thing. The second thing is there was a reflection about what could be a new generation civilization, European civilization. And for me, it's two things. One thing is what Norbert Elias could call civiltà. You know civiltà. Civiltà is two things. On the one side is the idea that we need to moderate the relationship between states. And on the other side, it's a great society. And for me, Europe is that. It's a process, it's a dynamic to moderate relationship between states, and we were very successful in Europe. And secondly, it's a great society which goes beyond nation, with people sharing legal, social, economic principles, but also concern with regard to the present and the future. And if you consider that, you see that from the north to the south, the east to the west, or the west to the east, we share a lot in common. We have that society which conditions the possibility of a federation. And maybe it was not the case 20 or 40 years ago, but there is a dynamic which is favorable to this European society, particularly among young people. And we need to be aware of that, because it's also a way to understand the attachment of European citizens to the EU. And it's a condition also to think a real transnational democratic space which will allow a European federation.
Democracy is the center of the European Union, but also the EU is composed of 27 different members. And so in many countries, every country is different in terms of policies, but also law, religion, population, etc. And how different are the approaches of the different countries depending on their own civilization and culture when they have to take like common decision among the European Union. If you want to answer this question, Mr. Pelko.
Yes, thanks for invitation. I will touch the notion of civilization because it's important that I also say something about this. Because for me, the definition of civilization is not so much what is the best about it, but how a civilization can overcome the worst about itself. And it's not the usual conflict between civilization and barbarism. On the contrary, there is a barbarian inside every civilization. And I think here Europeans, we as Europeans, we have a lot to say because some of the worst barbarism were done by us. But as Slavoj Žižek said in the introduction of your previous book, Les Sept Révélations, we are maybe one of the rares that were able to reflect upon these atrocities based on our own, let's say, civilizational output, talking about equality, solidarity, democracy, human rights. So in a way, the same history that was cruel toward the others help us reflect upon our atrocities. And this is maybe the way to create the narrative about the civilization now, European ones. For me, I would completely go in line with what Arantxa says, but I would add just one. I would add culture and art. I would add culture and art because not in the sense of decorating, de décorer, no, or making things nicer to digest. No, on the contrary, I think that art and culture can reach a sublime way to confront the most painful episodes of our history. And here I'm talking, we cannot talk about the Holocaust without now thinking about Claude Lanzmann's Shoah. We cannot think about fascism without thinking about Pasolini's films. And this is where art can help us first understand and also feel the unbearable atrocity of the period that we went through. I'm telling you this because, as I was presented, I'm now the program director of something to happen in Nova Gorica, Slovene one, and Gorizia, Italian one, in 2025. It will be for the first time that two cities from two countries, European countries, will be together the capital, the European culture capital. It is possible because of the European Union, because where there were borders, when there were fight for borders, there is no more border now. My office in the street that starts in Slovenia and it goes in Italy without any trespassing, without any barricades. But at the same time, and I don't want to be too much politically correct here, people there still remember that they were not allowed to speak their own language. You know, there were times when fascists didn't allow Slovenes to speak Slovene. And the story that we are dealing with is a tragic story, but European story. There was a composer and conductor in the late 30s called Lucian Bratuš, and since he was not allowed to speak Slovene, they were only allowed to sing in church choirs. But even this became too much for the squadre fasciste, and they make him drink the engine oil, which created terrible pain for him, and he died because of this. But his wife, Ljubka Šorli, survived. She was a poetess, and what I was fascinated is that even in spite of such atrocity, she was able to sublimate this intimate tragedy into a poetry that she was written then for 40, 50 years. What we can do now, 80 years later, is that we will open the house, their family house, into a house of literature and music. So in a way, this is at the same time la fierté européenne et la honte de la civilisation européenne. But at the same time, this is possible to think because of the projects like European Culture Capital, which is a perfect European project.
Can I just react to what you said? Yeah, it's really important that we develop this narrative. The fact that we took a critical distance with regard to what we called in the past civilization, and the fact that we were able to implement somehow a new civilization based finally upon the capacity to understand and to implement limit of power, limit of political power and national power with a kind of supranational right, limit of manpower with the centrality of equality between male and female, limit with regard to the use of environment with the Green Deal we have now, limit of sovereignty and democracy with this idea of civil society, which is also the DNA, and limit also to our imperialism. And I think the civilization we have developed, or no matter we call it a society or whatever, has completely changed. But the perception we have worldwide has not changed. I was invited to present my book at the UN, and there was Moroccan, Senegalese, people from everywhere, and the perception they have about Europe is the past Europe, the before war Europe, when you discuss. And this is an issue. And it means that we have not been capable of sharing with consistence the model and the reality of Europe today. And this is a weakness. And it's a problem. It's a real problem in a world of propaganda where we have no very strong European voice.
Can I react to this? Because, I mean, I have a bit of trouble with using the word civilization to express a political reality, which is the European Union. Let's face it, the battle of narrative is not just something that the EU faces from outside the EU. Inside the European Union, the word civilization is constantly misappropriated to push a vision of what the EU so-called civilization is about. And you have those that say, in the name of European civilization, Europe can only be Christian, for example. Or in the name of a European civilization, homosexuals have no place in Europe. So I have a bit of trouble with this word civilization because it is being constantly misappropriated outside and within. And then I have lots of questions. Is it a European Union civilization or a European civilization? And is it the civilization of those who live in the geographical territory called Europe, or also the Europeans, or those that were Europeans at some point that are now living in many other parts of the world, but share with Europe this desire for democracy, for freedom, for respect, for human dignity. So I think, again, I think what I would say is, yes, we have a political reality called European Union. It is based on history, but it stands on legitimacy. It stands on the desire to live and to preach and to practice, sometimes with a lot of difficulties, Article 2 of the European Treaty. I always look at Article 2 of the European Treaty, the Treaty of Lisbon. I know that you don't fall in love with the treaty, but if you read this treaty, it tells you who Europe is. Article 2 of the Lisbon Treaty, please. It's human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, human rights. This is the European Union, but this is also Europe outside the European Union. But this is many other parts of the world that also share this. So again, yes, the European Union, the EU needs a narrative, and it needs to do a lot of work to build the legitimacy that this political construct that is unique in the world, that I grant you, the EU is unique in the world, this legitimacy has to be built, and this part of building this legitimacy is a very strong narrative that tells us why we want to do it together and for what we want to do this together.
I would like to react on that because I really think that when we talk about European civilization or about civilization of the European Union, we're not talking about the same thing. And why I wanted to share with you some main aspects of our history, because we like it or dislike it, we have these roots, and this is our civilization. When I was, I had a lot of chance. We spoke home 5 languages, all of us. I was reading in German legends and Mitteleuropäische legends in Goethisch, and then reading in Latin and Italian the mythology. It was not the only one. It was I mean, our background. And when I was young, I had a lot of chance. You're thinking about, because you're talking about what happened during the Soviet Union period. But I had a lot of chance. At 70 years old, I did all the museums in Europe. And guess what? When I arrived in Krakow, it was very complicated. I found Leonardo da Vinci. When I go in Prado, at the time it was difficult to go to Madrid because it was the Franco period. You have in Prado, you have the best paintings. You go in St. Petersburg at the time, very difficult. You have the best impressionists. That was Europe. When you remember the cathedrals, I never understood how you can go in Chartres, in Bruges, in Sevilla, or in Milan and find the same wonderful Gothic cathedral. There was thousands of kilometers, but there was something that did that. They did the same thing in the same place. It was Europe. It was Europe's civilization. I don't like the idea to say there are Christian roots, or I agree with you on that 100%, but we have something in common. That's how we dealt for centuries. And if we don't know the history of what happened in Europe, and in Europe I put Russia, I put Turkey, because it was Europe, in our sense of Europe. It was a territory. We cannot understand what's going on. We cannot understand, without the story and why we're there and what has been built in our culture, we cannot understand. If you don't know the story of Minotauro and you don't know the story of the unicorn, American people will never understand that. We understand it because we are living that. And I really think it's important to know the history of Europe because Europe is unique. It's where the civilization is born worldwide. It's around the Mediterranean Sea. We cannot invent something else. It's like that. Then, 5,000 years old, which other place in the world? Then this is civilization for me. And we cannot pass through that if we want to prepare our future. And liberty for me, it's the main reason of Europe.
No, but just to rebound on the two of you have said, there is what I said earlier, there is a difficulty with the word civilization because there was a big taboo and there was a misleading and a misuse by populists or by autocrats. But at the same time, we need to give our definition because whatever we want, the reality is this word is used by the other, by the American, by the Russian, by the Indian, etc. So we need to give a definition of what we want. And I like the Norbert Elias definition, which is a democratic process of cooperation between state and citizen and a great society, a civiltà. So let's have a definition and let's dare it and let's consider that we have renewed, we have invented something different, but keeping our creativity, our historical DNA. But we can say there is no civilization. Last March 1 year ago, President Zelensky, when he was in European Parliament, said the European Union is a civilization. He means the European Union is a political embodiment of a new civilization. And we, Ukraine, are the guardian, the frontier of this civilization. Because he knows that this is used also by Russia, and we need to give our definition, and Europe needs to stand for something which is into a long historical dynamic. So that's really important, because otherwise, in this war of narrative in which we are, it lacks something. I think Europe has legitimacy. Europe is sustainable. And Europe is a much wider project than a technocratic project or a Franco-German project. And we need to come back to the post-war Europe, because post-war, I worked for 6 years in Geneva as director of the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, that you know because it's organizing the Eurovision Song Contest. And I became aware there that post-war, there were people from the Eastern country, from Italy, from Portugal, from the UK, who wanted to build this European political project. And it was not only a Franco-German project at all, it was something wider. And many times I wonder how this project was so resilient, because if you remember the last 20 years, we had more than 10 vital crises. And my answer is this project is the result of a collective willingness of citizens, engaged citizens and civil society beyond the nation. And we have the narrative. We have not to invent it. We have just to make the coming out of it. We have everything, and I think the union is working. It's not efficient. It's not completely always as the one we wanted. It's not perfect, but it is working. And now we have just to invent the next step, because the geopolitical reality and the economic reality has changed, and we need to adapt it. But this is life. But let's say that we are successful, and we can be proud of what we have done, and now we need to invent the next step. And we need to be entrepreneur of the next step, as we have been somehow entrepreneur of our past with success.
So you just talked about the next. Oh, sorry. There will be time for questions just afterwards, but at the very end, in like 5-10 minutes, or is it just? Do you think about this? That's why. Oh, okay. Well, maybe you can just ask it.
Thank you very much. Quick question, I promise. So you have been special advisor to digital, and you were talking about building a civilization for tomorrow. How do you think new technologies can help build the European identity of tomorrow? Thank you.
Very, very quick answer, because, but I really believe we can leverage new technology in order to promote a transnational democracy. With AI, I was special advisor on AI, the progress in terms of translation are remarkable. And we can today design a society where each other can dialogue, and we can prepare that, and we can invest of that. In the same way, Europe, it's a matter of solidarity and welfare. With AI, we can also improve health radically, and we can have a more qualitative health policy, personalized, with more equality for everybody, which is not the case. So we can use technology in order to reinvent our welfare state, to develop a multilingual and transnational democracy, to fight also against disinformation, because it's a way also to disinform, but we can use it. It's also core of our system of value. I don't want to speak more about that.
I would like to react, because I think that you rose an essential question. We are in a polycrisis. We all know we have war, we have food crisis, we have climate crisis, we have security crisis, we have financial crisis, and so on and so forth. But we forget that we are in a revolution, the digital revolution that was there even before the sanitary crisis, and that we are living in this disrupted world. And Europe is not ready. We are very, very far away where we should. We should both those who invented Google, we should those who invent Microsoft. We are completely absent, and there is the future. If we don't have STEM education, if we don't have the tools to transform the energy, make an energy transition, if we are not the tools to reinvent what is the world of tomorrow, 85% of the job will be disrupted in the next 5 years. Where is Europe? Europe's not there. And despite the wonderful efforts of Maria Gabriel, who does a wonderful job in innovation and creativity, we are not there. And worse, sorry, but the worst thing, women are not there. You have 20% of engineers. 1 of 5 women in STEM in Europe, and you have 65% engineers women in Saudi Arabia, 65% in Emirates. And when you have to build a bridge, you take a talent, you take the best, a man or a woman. And where are our talents in that? I mean, we are still in the past and not prepared to prepare the future. And this in cybersecurity, less than 11% of women. And AI, women are 20% behind the algorithm, with all the stereotypes that are scale up. And this is dangerous. It's just dangerous. And Europe is not there. We're talking about ethic. We're talking about values. We're talking about freedom, democracy. We need everybody on board.
But we need a big bang because
Yeah,
we are
and
far.
there, Europe, it's really, for me, it's the challenge. And I'm very happy that in SAP now you're also learning coding, you're also learning computer science, you're also, because without that, Europe will just die.
So, thank you for all these answers. We have one final question, which is basically the main theme of our Week of Europe. Today we have tried to question the European Union and its place among our countries through a civilizational approach, or the question of it. So our objective here is to try to answer the following question with this point of view. Is a pride for Europe possible? So we would like to ask you, Mr. Perko, to try to answer it.
It is. It is for sure. It is possible. I think one of the things that we mentioned about the narratives and the artificial intelligence, I would like to, because we are speaking in Paris in English, I would like to insist again on the importance of languages. And I don't expect so much from the artificial intelligence to think instead of me, but I expect from the artificial intelligence to be able to translate my own thoughts in my own language to all others to be understood. I think this is not a big thing to ask, but it is possible. And there I really think that sometimes our language become poorer or even emptier because of this universal Esperanto we are using. I think it's really important to say, because if you are talking about Europe, this diversity of languages, it's not just a political phrase. It really, I sincerely believe that you can express yourself really well in little nuances, especially in art and culture, in your own mother's tongue. But the fact that the development of the technology today really allows me to understand each other. I'm giving you again an example from Gorizia. Imagine that we are just a few miles away, not even a few meters away. We speak two different languages, Italian and Slovene, and there are minorities on both sides. And I swear to you, the moment we turned into English, it's poorer. It's poorer because there are not these little nuances. So I bluff that I understand all Italian through French, which I do. I don't dare to speak, but I'm telling you, the more we work together, the more the kids learn together, the more they play together, the more mother take their kids to the kindergarten or the playground on the other side, the more not that the two languages mix, but we are really able to understand the nuances of each other. And in a way, talking about pride and this kind of, what we are proud of, I think this is one of the things that we could be the most proud of. The fact that languages survived, that languages have their official presence in European Parliament, that everybody can express himself, herself in his own language, but at the same time that we are able to understand each other. For me, it's I would really say almost crucial. And just a little point at the end, because you mentioned women so often. One of the elements of European stability is also creating institutions. So there were many fights, but I was impressed. I was in Elefsina in Greece recently for the opening of their cultural capital, and there was an exhibition on Melina Mercouri. We all know her, but maybe not all know how many fights she fought in her life for the film fund in Greece, for the gender equality in Greece, for the return of Parthenon parts. So, this is where, in fact, I would say media, university, history roles is to show the nuances of languages, to show the institutional remains of such individual fights, because then it's really best practice that we can learn out of it.
So thank you very much for all those answers, and we'll now go to the question from the public.
Sorry, hi, can I start?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. I think everybody here probably really enjoyed it, and it's super interesting to hear about. My question is for Madame Corazza, specifically, since I was very inspired by your speech about women and our place in Europe. So it's about, what do you believe that nowadays, the role of women should be in security and keeping the peace, promoting peace in the world and in Europe? If you want to answer that.
I believe, again, with this very serious situation, unique public crisis that we are facing, we need all the talents. You know what a general does when he wants to win a battle? He takes everybody on board. And what we're doing, we are leaving half of the persons aside. And we need women at the table negotiation. We need women in the fight against climate. We need new women in health. We need women, not because they're women, not because they're better, but because all talents have to bring their contribution. Not to protect women or to help them. It's because the society, the economy, needs a contribution in difficult situations. And again, I really think that we are lucky because we are 3 women at the head of Europe. Christine Lagarde, who is for me an incredible woman. It's really not only a friend, but somebody that really admire a lot. Roberta Metsola and Ursula von der Leyen. I really believe that probably the fact that we have 3 women, the issue of this war and the issue of this crisis will not be the same. Because you have a different way of thinking. Again, women are not better than men at all. And it's not being a woman that's an issue. It's the fact that we need all contribution. And it's a pity when you see in politics, in economics, in the jobs of the future, the lack of differentiation that we bring in Europe. We have a lot of laws. We are very good champions in Europe in terms. We just in November have this new decree, I don't know what to say, that legislation who gives access to women in the boards at the European level. That's good. We have to prepare, of course, this work-life balance to permit them to work as men and do career as men. We have a lot of laws in Europe that are very woman-friendly, if I say so. But again, we don't have enough persons in cybersecurity, in the table negotiation. Did you see the picture in the last COP27 in Egypt? There was 1 woman among 200 men. And I'm sure that women want to fight as men against. And what is very important is for you, it's if you want to bring women on board, we have to explain that it's on purpose, that it's to do something useful for the society. Because women, more than men, want to do something useful with a positive impact. Men too, but women is really the reason for the decision. And if you have so many women that don't work, it's because they don't find a purpose. Then this is something that Europe should do. Bring a purpose to bring all the talents around the table and to not only construct Europe, but also bring peace again and be like leading by example worldwide. Then I really think it's a question of numbers, feminist diplomacy, how we use feminist finance, how we drive resources, but it's all a question of bring on board the best talents of young women who wants really to make the difference and contribute to the society and economy.
First of all, excellent idea to having this this week. I'd like to make a plea for educating people about Europe in the schooling. I take me, right, I'm an old codger, but I remember when I was brought up in England, and there, fine, I learned English history, fine, I had A-levels when I was learning about a certain amount about foreign history, but I do think that we could really develop a sort of a class or courses or what have you, where you can explain to people the way the individual European countries, in fact, fit together. You mentioned about churches. I mean, someone mentioned saying that the history of Europe is built in stone, in fact, with all the different churches, as you say, wherever you go. the philosophy, the Greeks, the Roman civilization. I can't help feeling that we could really have a much broader and perhaps more comprehensive teaching about Europe itself. And I read a lot about it now, much later, but it's fascinating. Right? I never learned anything about Eastern Europe, but it's fascinating. It is part of our history. Then about Spain and the way, right, Muslim Spain, in fact, irrigated our Renaissance, in fact, and what have you. So there really is something to be taught there.
Very much agree with this. Actually, if we know the Greeks, it's because the Muslims in Spain translated the Greeks, and that's how we learn to learn them. This is one of the many interesting things that one can unpack when one looks at history. There is a very, very good book that I always recommend by a Dutch journalist that decided to travel around Europe. And it's called In Europe. And the author is Gert Meck. It's fantastic to read because you discover the parts of Europe that you never learned at school. Because this was not part of what we learned. At least not what my generation learned. Now, when saying that we have to study more and better European history, there are also difficulties associated with this. I remember attempts at building a common curricula to study history in Europe with the obvious discrepancies, disparities, not to say fights between different member states who have a different read of history too. So it's good to say that we need to learn more about our history, but it is not, we should not underestimate also the fact that we do not, in parts of a period of our history, we do not share a common view of what happened during history, and therefore it's an issue that still we have to keep on working. But in my view, it's, as you rightly say, the charting the future requires a good understanding of the past, and I don't think we have a good enough understanding of the past.
Thank you so much, everyone. My question was for Madame Gonzalez. You talked about economic competitiveness, you talked about democracy, you talked about solidarity, and you said that were the roots of Europe. The extreme right start to play a bigger role in the political game in Europe. Do you think that Europe will be stable enough to fight against the ideas that the extreme right are trying to share around Europe?
Very good question. Now, we have to be humble in Europe. Humbleness is not a word that we like to use a lot. I think we have to be very humble. And why do we have to be humble? Because at the moment, the vision that we have of the European Union is being challenged from outside the European Union, but also from within the European Union. And the main challenge goes as follows. There is no such thing as a universal set of values. This is what China, this is what Russia say of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. They say there is no universal view. It depends on where you sit. Human rights depends on how you look at human rights, and this depends on where you sit. But I also find the same tactics being played in the European Union on Article 2 of the treaty. Let me read it for you, because this is our compact. This is why we want to stick together. The Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These values are common to the member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between men and women prevail. This is our compact. Now there are people in Europe who challenge this compact, who say this is to be interpreted on the light of the specific national circumstances, that there is no such thing as a European rule of law. I hope I'm not being seen as disrespectful, but if you look at and if you read what a number of European leaders have spoken about recently, they do not think there is such thing as a European rule of law, that each country should be free to define what rule of law is, that each country should be free to define what tolerance is and what pluralism is, and what equality between men and women is. Because this issue is also a matter for discussion within the European Union. So yes, we have an issue. And this is why every time we've got to make a political choice, whether it's at the national level or whether it's at the European level, if we believe in this Article 2, on the universal value of Article 2 of our treaty, on the fact that equality between men and women is the same in Finland, is the same in Hungary, is the same in Portugal, in Greece or Spain, then we have to say so. So yes, there is a big battle, and the battle is in the European Union too. And we have to decide on which side of the battle we will be.
I just wanted to add that this diversity in the frame of Europe is our richness. Because if we were all the same in Europe and not 27 countries with different backgrounds, it would be, we lose the richness of what Europe is. Then we have to keep our identity, but in the same time be proud to be European altogether for the same values and what we said just before. But again, we have to keep our differences in terms of languages, in terms of culture, in terms of who was the winner for where, because, as you say, we don't have the same in our history books, depending which side you were of the frontier. Then this, we have to keep it, because the difference, it's a strength. They really believe that.
Yeah, but I fully agree, but the question is how. Because if we look at post-war, in science, in law, in art, there were people everywhere who were sharing the same values, and it was very clear. And they were sharing also the same literature and artistic heritage. So we need to be careful when we speak about culture. 100 years ago, there were many more people who thought that there was a European culture. And the discussion between Europeans among the values was converging. It's not the case anymore. So we need to understand why. First thing. Second thing, post-war, there was in business, in academia, in science, in art, I already said that, people who really wanted to develop this European construction, and there was a kind of societal, civil society leadership, which means that everybody somehow felt responsible for doing Europe, which is not the case anymore today. So for me, the question is, how can we redevelop this leadership? There are everywhere people who are attached to Europe, if you look at Eurobarometer, and we are at one of the highest level in European history. But they don't know how to mobilize themselves, how to act transnationally. So we need to find new ways of reinvesting the European project. It should not be only a political thing made for political leaders. With the system we had with the European Council leading everything, somehow we lose responsibility of the European project. We need to recreate this responsibility. And we can't be satisfied with the debate between the nationalistic and the pro-European. We need to find other ground. 4 years ago, before the European election, a certain number of people decided to launch a movement in order to show that there were European concerns, which were not nationalistic, but common. We launched Civico Europa and the We European, you were part of it, consultation, and we consulted 40 million European citizens. And from that, and these people 2 years before fight for the citizen conference, but from that, what we saw was very clear. When you ask a European citizen to think and to act as a European citizen, he gives a European answer. If you ask him the same answer as a national citizen, he gives another answer. With the European election system we have, it's a nationalistic system because every European citizen somehow is asked to say what he thinks regarding Europe with a national perspective. We did this 40 million consultation, and we had the same answer everywhere on the kind of priority we need to have and what we put behind these priorities. So somehow there is diversity, but which gathers us is deeper, stronger, and the political system we have, in fact, just show polarization. So we need to have a debate on that. I participated for the last 2 years in a high-level group, a confidential high-level group led by Maria Jo Rodriguez, that you know, on how to change European institutions. And there was constitutionalists, former commissioner from the 27, not from France and Germany or from the 6. And what we develop is a concept about the commonwealth, the common goods we can have, because the reality is we are not anymore able of providing common goods in terms of security, in terms of health, in many fields. And we can do it together. And this can be something which can project ourselves in the future. But we need to renew the way of acting and have a system which allows people to think European. Once again, if you ask a European citizen to think about what should be the priority for the EU, as a European citizen, he will give an answer. If you ask him what should be this priority as a national citizen, he will be another answer. And this answer will be very often, even if he is moderate, populistic.
Can I just add something to, because Arantxa said something that is really crucial, I think, that sometimes, if I understood well, sometimes you cannot say pro et contra. Sometimes you simply need to choose sides. And you know, sometimes I think it's really important to hear this from a politician or former politician, because an artist, a journalist, an intellectualist can do this without any consequences, choose side and then fight for this. But what you are referring to, and there are, I'm sure we have the same politicians in mind, there are some politicians now in Europe that made me think, when I was a student in Paris, in front of Notre Dame, once I saw somebody giving like a carton, I'm poor, aveugle, da, da, da. In the meantime, uses this as an alibi to go into handbag of somebody to pick something. Very often, I think, the politicians are using these words, very important words, to pluralism, democracy, right to speech, as a kind of alibi or even a hide to, how to say, to try to grab from our bags of democratic rights. And I think here sometimes it's really important that there used to be intellectual figures. They said like this, no, you're cheating. It's not true what you say. There are great journalists that sometimes dare to do this. But I think in a way with the inflation of news and fake news, sometimes such figures are missing. Missing simply, you know, the figure that would say, sorry, this is not true what you're doing, Mr. This and this, or Madam this and this. So in a way, this fight for justice and the truth sometimes really needs taking sides, I think. And it could be even politically dangerous, but I think it's necessary.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like to share a question that we have within Volt Europa, which is a political party at the pan-European level where I'm committed into. I'd like to share a question that we have from within, getting back to European civilization and the way we build it. I'd like to bounce back to what you said just before, because when we talk about civilization, that it means that we drive back to education, to history, to the narrative that we have when we are sharing our history. Nowadays, the way that education is being led, the way history is being taught, is through a national lens, which is, we are talking about French history through the national lens, and the Germans are doing right the same, and the Italians quite the same. So to get the European narrative like mythology and civilizations, we would need then to transfer like education at a more European level to have it on the common ground. And then the question turns immediately to how are we going to do this? Because to transfer like more like policies to European level, we need and we lack a democratic pillar, because most of the people now believe, I mean, I'm sure they're not anti-European or skeptical. They are only feeling that Europe, and it's my opinion, is turning back, is looking in some other direction than its core values, and I'm talking about democracy, the way the European people are viewing democracy. And then my question becomes, do you believe that to transfer like this policy to European level, do we need like something as a democratic jump in terms of the way we ask the European people to vote on the constitution? I'm not saying a treaty, I'm saying a constitution, because we set up a treaty establishing a constitution, but to my point of view, it's not a constitution, because the constitution is voted by the people for the people. And for the treaty, we know that it wasn't the case for certain reasons. So do you believe that we should go back to a civil and a civic convention and asking the European people to vote in one single moment on a text that is defining our common values, to make sure that we move to that further integration?
So let me speak now with a bit of my own national experience. If I take my country, the competencies on education are not even national. They are regional. They are regional because they take into account also language specificities, context specificities. So I am not sure that, I think we have an issue with how we learn history in Europe, because obviously it is done through a very national lens, and sometimes this national lens is without filters. You were always the winner in the battle and the loser was somebody else. But I'm not sure that the medicine, let's say, to cure this would be to elevate the competence, to make it a community competence. I think it has to rely much more on people learning from other people. And this, in a way, is what we do when we have an Erasmus program where you cross the border and you hear what's happening on the other side. When you talk to people that have lived this. I mean, I'm sure that this is a big issue in the region you come from, which has a tortuous, not past, but present, I mean, recent past, let's say. Not present, recent past. So I'm not sure that the medicine is to elevate this to a supranational level. I think the answer maybe is to build more bottom-up work, much more bottom-up dialogue, and to use also the power that a number of countries have and regions within countries have to build this history together bits by bits, neighbors working together like the experience that you are describing between the two sides, between Slovenia and Italy, or between Spain and Portugal, or between France and Germany have done a lot of that. There are some parts where probably a bit more time would be necessary. That, in my view, would be a bit more legitimate than trying to elevate this to a competence that it's felt very closely to where people are.
Just to complement, for me, which is really important, is to develop European experience for everybody. This can be done by Erasmus, but we had objective in order to have half a generation by 2020 doing Erasmus. We have failed for students. But my feeling is we need to take people earlier, the earlier the better. When you are between 8 and 12, there were surveys about that. I was in charge of the democratization of Erasmus, and we got the political agreement during the 15 years ago French presidency. We made research, And if you send a boy or a girl of that age for 1 week abroad, even in a country he does not understand or she does not understand at all the language, it changes her perspective for life. So if we do that, which is a real Erasmus for young people, when you send them alone, not in a class, in a family, they don't speak at all the language, everybody will try to, and they will see the foreigner differently. And this is really feasible, and this can have a leverage effect, because when he come back, he speak in the family, or he or she speak within the family, with the teacher, etc., and it might have a domino effect. One thing. The second thing is, I fought for the conference, a citizen conference on the future of Europe. We have Monsef there who participated. And for me, the idea was the following. Can we, if we sort European citizens, how do they react? They sorted 1,000 European citizens, and most of them for participating to the conference on the future of Europe, and I think 95% say yes, I want to participate. These people came from all generations, all political sensitivity, all places of the EU. And after, when there was the exercise to know what they thought, all consider themselves as now real European citizens. It was a transformative experience. 95% of them had zero link with European affairs, nor belonging to a European movement or having institutional understanding of it. All of them, I speak under your control, consider that there is a real need for a European education, an institutional education at the highest level, for transnational democratic experience. They all consider that we need a participative break to the European democracy. They are more or less all disappointed by European MEP, what I understood, or a big part, and European politicians, but this is the rule. Our citizens are not satisfied with their politicians nowadays. But they all want this experience to be open to all European citizens. And for me, this is a game changer. And what I may say also, having read the paper, they were all very involved and took the time to understand that. And you want people from the extreme, the extreme right, the far left, the center, but the result was the same. They became European citizens for the first time with European perspective. So for me, we need to generalize that, and the European democratic experience should not be a privilege for some European MEP or for some politician. It should be the thing of everybody, and this can be a game changer, and we can expand that quite rapidly. And it's not a matter of developing a federation. It's a condition to develop a real European transnational democracy, and it's not a so big investment. It's a matter of political priority.
I just would like to really enhance what he says. And based on my experience, at my time it was not so easy to travel, but we were home in Madrid, we were home in Paris, we were home in London, we were home in Budapest, we were home because our parents said, we don't make gifts, we give you opportunities. And it was the same for all of us. The result was that my sister, for instance, spent 8 years in the Balkans. She did the war because she felt European, and there was the first war. 8 years in the Balkans means Vukovar, Sarajevo, Knin under bombs. It has been very tough, but she believed in Europe, and it was the first war there. My brother is now representative of the European Union in Rome, after being in many cabinets of commissioner for 40 years in the European Union and spokesman of the President of the European Parliament. It doesn't come like that. It comes because for us, Europe was our playground, and we spoke all languages, and I don't think that we need an education at the European level. All of us can read. in other languages, in other cultures, and travel. That's what you have the chance. You can travel very easily. It's even not very expensive. In Europe, it's not so big. When you meet people, Erasmus is a good way, but you go and visit, go around, and there you will understand what Europe is. Experience it yourself. And this, for me, is the real way to make Europe, to meet with other people, to exchange, to understand what happens in your story. You don't learn it at school or when you're 8 years old. You learn it all your life, and then you become European, and you feel proud to be European because you see what's behind Europe and what it means.
Thank you very much for all these answers, and thank you for the public's attention.
Night. Thank you to all our guests for this wonderful and very high-level debate. It was a great lunch for this first edition of the European Week here at ESCP. Thank you, Madame Corazza, Monsieur Pelco, Madame Gonzalez, Monsieur Closa. The auditors can buy, by the way, your book, your excellent book outside. Thank you, dear friends, for your presence here. I'm sure you had a lot of questions, but we need to stop at some point. Tomorrow we will focus on the state of democracy here in Europe with a high-profile guest, as always. We will also focus on the importance of the new technologies in Europe Thursday, as we mentioned it during the conference. So thank you again to all our partners that contribute to this prestigious and ambitious projects. This event also shows the implication of ESCP students such as Jean Gasque of the ESCP European Society. Please welcome him and see you tomorrow.
Hi everyone, so I'm Jean. I'm president and founder of ESCP, co-founder of ESCP European Society. We're a brand new society, and I want to say thank you to Tribune. I think you guys are inspirational. I studied European politics in the UK, so that's quite controversial in itself. And I can say it's really inspiring when I hear all of you talking. I also went to a European school actually, so I did learn a bit about European history. So that was quite interesting. The European school concept wasn't brought up, but European baccalaureate as well. I really, but either way, I'd like to say thank you. And we've organised 3 events for this week to contribute to your week. We've organised the first one is on Wednesday. So at 12:30 in l'Amphi Guy, we have just a few workers virtually who are going to talk about what they do in the EU and how to get maybe an internship. At 8, we have a Spanish soirée, so that will be at the bar downstairs to promote European exchange. So and on Friday we have a guest for a former European Commissioner, and so she will be coming, and we have a podcast here, which was actually permitted by Tribune, which was made possible by Tribune, and we'll be talking about her life in politics as a European leader. So that's with Martin Reichardt, Friday here, 12:30. Thank you so much.